the galactic hegemony had ruled for millennia. An empire of thousands of species, spanning countless star systems, it enforced rigid hierarchies where the strong preyed upon the weak. At the top of this unchallenged order stood the Vaetheri, ancient, calculating, and ruthless. They dictated the course of civilization, crushing any who dared rise against them. For centuries, they had dismissed humanity as insignificant. A primitive species from an obscure world, bound by their own gravity well until mere centuries ago. In their arrogance, the Vaetheri allowed humanity to expand into the stars, expecting them to submit as all others had. But humanity did not kneel. The spark of defiance ignited on the colony world of Theros 4. A once thriving human settlement, it had become a battlefield overnight. The hegemony, seeking to remind lesser species of their place, unleashed the Exarch Legion, elite biomechanical warriors designed to break civilizations in days. They broadcast their message across the galaxy, submit, or be extinguished. But as the dust settled, something unprecedented happened. Theros 4 did not fall. Against all logic, the colony's defenders, a ragtag force of planetary militia, private security, and armed civilians, held their ground. With no standing fleet in orbit, no reinforcements from Earth, and no hope of diplomatic resolution, they fought like demons. They repelled wave after wave of Exarch assaults, reducing towering war machines to scrap, ambushing enemy patrols, and defying the Vaetheris will in ways no species had dared before. Among them was Commander Elias Voss, a former Martian Defense Corps officer turned mercenary, who had stayed on Theros 4 to train the militia. He quickly became the face of the resistance, his voice broadcast across underground networks, inspiring not just the defenders of Theros but the entire human race. "We are not subjects," he declared, bloodied but unbowed. "We are not vassals. We are not prey. If the hegemony seeks to break us, let them come. They will learn what humanity truly is." Word spread faster than the hegemony could contain it. Across the galactic net, hidden human enclaves and sympathetic alien species watched in awe. No one had ever seen a species resist the Vaetheri like this, without a formal navy, without interstellar allies, without fear. The hegemony responded with brutal efficiency. They dispatched an entire fleet, led by the dreaded warlord Exarch Prime Kael'Vex, a being who had razed 100 worlds without hesitation. He did not come to conquer, he came to exterminate. But by the time the fleet arrived, Theros 4 was no longer a simple colony. It had become a fortress of defiance, a rallying cry that spread across the stars. Every human world, every outpost, every ship in the void took note. Humanity had a choice: submit and become another forgotten footnote in history, or rise. And so, they chose to fight. The Vaetheri fleet emerged from hyperspace over Theros 4, an overwhelming force of dreadnoughts, battleships, and swarms of Exarch warforms. The stars above the embattled human colony darkened as the invaders cast their shadow over the world. Exarch Prime Kael'Vex, seated upon his throne of shifting metallic tendrils, gazed down at the defiant planet. In his long reign of conquest, no species had ever forced his hand to return a second time. He relished the chance to personally bring the humans to their knees. His first message was simple: surrender and die swiftly. Resist and be erased. From the surface, a single reply was broadcast in return, a simple, ancient Earth phrase: come and take it. The battle for Theros 4 had begun. ###### the unconventional war. Humanity had no navy to meet the Vaetheri in orbit. No planetary shields to block their bombardment. No war fleets to challenge their blockade. What they had were minds that refused to surrender and a willpower that had forged civilizations from the ashes of despair. Rather than stand in the open against overwhelming firepower, Commander Elias Voss and his militia had transformed the cities, mountains, and forests of Theros 4 into death traps. Hidden bunkers, reinforced tunnels, EMP ambushes, and cyber warfare teams turned the very infrastructure of the planet against its invaders. As the first waves of Exarch shock troops landed, they found themselves disoriented, cut off from their command networks as human hackers infiltrated and disrupted their battlefield systems. Entire platoons of biomechanical warriors were lured into alleys and tunnels, where they were buried under tons of collapsing buildings and explosive traps. The skies burned as improvised railgun emplacements, converted from industrial mining equipment, punched holes through the hulls of VA-Theory dropships. Civilian spacecraft, modified with jury-rigged weaponry, launched hit-and-run raids, harassing supply lines and delaying reinforcements. For the first time in history, an inferior species was making the hegemony bleed. ###### The tide turns. Calvex was not a fool. He recognized the humans' ingenuity, their refusal to fight a battle on the hegemony's terms. But he had crushed rebellions before, and he knew how to break a species' will. Orbital bombardments began. Entire human districts were turned to slag, forcing the defenders to retreat further underground. Starving refugees, wounded civilians, and exhausted fighters huddled together in bunkers, listening to the tremors of destruction above. Calvex's voice echoed across every hacked frequency. "You will not win. Your suffering is meaningless. Surrender, and I will spare the remnants of your kind." For a moment, there was silence. Then, a single broadcast came through the static, **** Elias Voss, battered but unyielding, staring into the camera, ****. "Suffering? You think this breaks us?" His voice was a low growl, filled with defiance. "We are humanity. We don't surrender. We endure. And we learn." Behind him, a squad of engineers worked frantically at a console. The feed cut out. A moment later, deep within the planet's core, Theros IV's forgotten relic of an ancient war was reactivated. ###### A weapon from the past. Long before humanity's arrival, Theros 4 had been home to an extinct alien species. Buried beneath its mountains was a planetary defense cannon, a relic of a war fought eons ago. Non-functional for centuries, it had been assumed useless. But human engineers had a habit of making the impossible work. As the first VA-Theory dreadnought positioned itself for another barrage, the ground beneath Theros shook with power. A single, blinding beam of energy erupted from the planet's surface, ripping through the ship's shields and splitting the massive vessel in half. For the first time in the campaign, the VA-Theory fleet hesitated. For the first time, they feared. Theros 4 was not a broken world. It was a trap. The wreckage of the VA-Theory dreadnought drifted in low orbit over Theros 4, its sundered remains a silent monument to humanity's defiance. The galactic hegemony had never suffered such a loss, not to a species they deemed inferior. Not to a species that should have surrendered long ago. On the bridge of his war carrier, Exarch Prime Calvex watched the destruction unfold, his tendrils tightening with a rare sensation, **** uncertainty, ****. The planetary defense cannon, reactivated by human engineers, had tipped the scales. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a message. Humanity would not bow. They would claw, they would bite, and they would take the hegemony down with them. And that was unacceptable. With a gesture, Calvex sent his next command. Deploy the extinction protocol. #######. When you cannot win by strength, win by cunning. On the surface, Commander Elias Voss and his resistance fighters barely had time to celebrate their victory before alarms blared. Hacked VA-Theory transmissions revealed a chilling reality: the hegemony wasn't just going to keep fighting. They were going to make the planet uninhabitable. Massive warships repositioned themselves in orbit, aligning in a tight formation. These weren't standard bombardment ships. They were planet killers. The hegemony had never needed to use them before. No species had ever resisted to this degree. No species had ever fought back so effectively. Now, they would erase humanity from Theros altogether. ######. Desperation breeds innovation. Elias Voss knew that conventional resistance was no longer an option. They had already pushed their guerrilla tactics to the limit. The planetary cannon had bought them time, but it wasn't enough. If they couldn't win by force, they would win by deception. Voss and his team hacked into the hegemony's fleet command network. It was a long shot, but humanity had spent decades learning how to counter and infiltrate alien cyber warfare. The VA theory had always dismissed humans as technological inferiors. That mistake would cost them dearly. With a single breach in the enemy's security, the resistance uploaded false fleet orders. In the span of 4 minutes, the hegemony's own battle network turned against itself. Some warships detected phantom human fleets appearing in deep space. Others suddenly lost targeting data, believing their own allies had turned traitor. One battleship fired on another, believing it to be compromised. The battlefield descended into chaos. The hegemony had come to wipe humanity out. Now, they were turning their weapons on themselves. ###### The first retaliation. With the VA theory fleet in disarray, Elias and his forces seized their moment. Fighters, modified civilian ships, and even stolen VA theory vessels launched from the planet's surface. Their target? The enemy's planetary suppression command ship. A ship that, if destroyed, would break the enemy's ability to coordinate their attack. Against all odds, humanity had turned the war into something new, something the VA theory had never encountered before. A counterattack. As Voss led the charge, he sent one final message across the galactic net. To every human world, every fleet, every soldier hiding in the dark, we are not defeated. We are not broken. The war has begun. The war had begun. Across the galaxy, scattered human colonies and outposts intercepted Elias Voss's message. The defiance of Theros 4 was no longer a desperate last stand, it was a call to arms. For centuries, humanity had been a tolerated nuisance, a minor power allowed to exist at the fringes of the VA theory-dominated galaxy. Now, they had done the impossible. They had not only resisted the Exarch Legion but turned the hegemony's own weapons against them. The illusion of VA theory invincibility was shattered. And the galaxy was watching. ##### The fall of the suppression ship. Above Theros 4, the counterattack was in full swing. Human strike teams, piloting everything from repurposed shuttles to salvaged enemy fighters, surged toward the VA theory suppression command ship, the enemy's battlefield nerve center. Without it, the Exarch forces on the ground would be cut off, their orbital bombardment disrupted. But the enemy wasn't blind. Kael'Vex, furious at the unfolding disaster, had already identified the human's gambit. His warships regrouped, unleashing volleys of plasma fire at the approaching strike teams. One by one, human ships were incinerated. But that was the cost of war. Elias Voss and his elite squad, pilots, engineers, and cyber warfare specialists, pushed forward. Their stolen VA theory dropship took hit after hit, its shields flickering under the assault. Then, in a maneuver that defied all logic, Voss ordered the ship to dive straight into the suppression command ship's hangar bay. ##### The first human boarding action. The dropship crashed through the energy barriers of the hangar, skidding across the deck in a shower of molten metal. Before the VA theory security teams could react, human soldiers poured out, rifles blazing. It was the first recorded instance of a human boarding action against a hegemony warship. The VA theory, accustomed to their enemies surrendering or breaking under overwhelming firepower, were utterly unprepared for the sheer ferocity of humanity in close-quarters combat. Hallways became killing fields. Security droids were disabled with pinpoint EMP blasts. VA theory officers were overwhelmed by brutal, unrelenting melee assaults, because where the VA theory relied on combat drones and tactical calculations, humanity fought like cornered wolves. They fought with desperation. They fought with rage. They fought like nothing the VA theory had ever seen before. Voss led his squad straight to the primary command core. As they breached the final doors, they saw the VA theory admiral in charge of the fleet's operations, a multi-limbed strategist who had never known fear. Until now. As Elias Voss raised his rifle, the admiral's voice wavered. "You are not like the others." Voss pulled the trigger. "Damn right. Hashtag a galaxy on the brink. With the suppression ship destroyed, the entire battlefield shifted. VA-Theory forces on the ground lost coordination. Without their command link, many of their warforms turned dormant, allowing human resistance fighters to push back. In orbit, Kael'Vex watched in disbelief as his fleet crumbled into disorder. He had been forced to commit resources to Theros 4 to make an example of humanity. Now, the example being set was one of VA-Theory weakness. And in the depths of the galaxy, others were watching. Human colonies, long isolated, rallied to the cause. Sympathetic alien races, once too terrified to resist, began to whisper of rebellion. Mercenary fleets, seeing the cracks in the hegemony, began weighing new allegiances. The VA-Theory hegemony had ruled through fear. Now, that fear was breaking. And as the first human fleet began to mobilize from the Sol system, Kael'Vex realized that Theros 4 had not been a final stand. It had been the beginning of the end. For the first time in recorded history, the VA-Theory hegemony had lost a battle. Theros 4 still stood. The suppression ship had been destroyed. The Exarch Legion was in disarray. But the war was far from over. High above the embattled world, Exarch Prime Kael'Vex seethed aboard his command ship. The hegemony had underestimated humanity. That would not happen again. He would correct this mistake personally. Hashtag humanity strikes back. Back on Theros 4, Elias Voss and his resistance fighters barely had time to regroup. The planet was still under siege, and even with the VA-Theory fleet in disarray, the war was shifting. But now, humanity was no longer fighting alone. The Sol system had heard the call. From the heart of human space, the first interstellar warfleet assembled, not as a desperate last defense, but as a force with a single objective: total war. The 1st Terran Armada, an improvised fleet of refitted civilian haulers, retrofitted colony ships, and experimental warships, made the jump to Theros 4. They were not the strongest. They were not the largest. But they were the most dangerous fleet the galaxy had ever seen. Because while the VA-Theory waged war with precision and calculation, humanity fought to survive. Hashtag a war unlike any before. The moment the Terran Armada dropped out of FTL, Kael'Vex knew this was not like any rebellion he had crushed before. Humanity had adapted faster than any species in galactic history. Their fleet was unconventional, their tactics erratic, their strategies borderline suicidal, and yet, they worked. Human vessels fought like predators. They deployed drone swarms that overwhelmed VA-Theory targeting systems. They used kinetic kill missiles, projectiles traveling at near light speed, bypassing shields and ripping straight through enemy hulls. And most terrifying of all? They refused to retreat. Where other species would withdraw after suffering losses, humanity pressed forward. Ships with entire sections missing still fought. Pilots ejected, only to hijack enemy vessels mid-battle. Even when crippled, human warships turned themselves into weapons, ramming into enemy dreadnoughts, detonating reactors, taking VA-Theory ships with them. Kael'Vex had seen many wars. But he had never seen a species that fought like it had nothing to lose. Because in humanity's eyes, this was not just a war. This was survival. Hashtag the turning point. The battle for Theros 4 became the flashpoint for something greater. Across the galaxy, the hegemony's enemies took notice. The Veruan clans, once proud warriors crushed by the VA-Theory, saw humanity's defiance and rose in rebellion. The Zypheri Confederacy, a race of traitors once forced into servitude, realized the VA-Theory were not invincible. And on dozens of worlds, even among VA-Theory vassals, whispers of insurrection began to spread. Humanity had not just survived. Humanity had become a symbol. Hashtag Kael'Vex's last stand. With his forces crumbling, Kael'Vex made a decision that no Exarch Prime had made in 10,000 years. He would fight personally. Descending onto Theros 4 in his personal warframe, a towering cybernetic construct armed with weapons that had reduced worlds to dust, Kael'Vex sought to crush Elias Voss himself. he would show the galaxy what happened to those who defied the hegemony. But as he stepped onto the battlefield, weapons primed, he saw something that sent a rare chill through his metallic form. Voss wasn't running. Humanity wasn't running. They had fought to reclaim their world. And now? Now, they were coming for him. The entire world of Theros 4 had become a battlefield. The once beautiful landscapes were now scorched craters, cities in ruins, and oceans churned with the debris of destroyed warships. But the war, once confined to a single planet, had spread across the galaxy. Every human settlement, every far-flung colony, had mobilized. They were no longer fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. #### The rise of the human spirit. Humanity's relentless assault on the Va-Theri hegemony had turned the tide. The hegemony, once an unchallenged power that spanned thousands of worlds, was now facing widespread rebellion, internal strife, and the most dangerous opponent they had ever encountered, the indomitable human spirit. Across the galaxy, the Terran Armada grew. It was no longer a ragtag group of survivors. Humanity's fleet was now a juggernaut, pieced together with the blood, sweat, and ingenuity of millions. Shipyards that had once served peaceful colonies now churned out warships at an alarming rate, each one carrying the name of a fallen hero or colony. And on the front lines, Elias Voss, once a mercenary, now the unyielding leader of the human resistance, stood alongside his soldiers, the last line of defense between victory and extinction. The galaxy had taken note of what they had done. The Va-Theri, powerful as they were, now faced a galaxy on fire with rebellion. But for Kael'Vex, the war had become personal. #### The showdown on Theros 4. In the heart of the ruined capital of Theros 4, a final confrontation was about to unfold. Kael'Vex, encased in his mighty warframe, an ancient relic of the Va-Theri, stood tall, towering over the destruction. His form was an amalgamation of organic and synthetic parts, a symbol of his species' long history of conquest and domination. His weapons crackled with energy as he marched forward, his fury driving him. Elias Voss stood at the forefront of the human forces, his armor scarred and worn, his face weathered from weeks of constant battle. He had led humanity to this moment, but even he could not deny the enormity of the challenge ahead. Kael'Vex was more than just a leader. He was a living weapon, a force of nature, and Elias had spent every waking moment preparing for this moment. Humanity's hope now rested on his shoulders. "Commander," one of his officers said, voice tense over the comms. "We've given everything. We've won, but we need you to finish this. It's time." Voss looked to the sky, where a storm of Va-Theri reinforcements loomed. "This isn't just about victory," Elias replied, his voice firm and unwavering. "This is about proving to every species in the galaxy that humanity cannot be crushed." With a single nod, he turned to face the battlefield. The fight to reclaim the galaxy started here. #### A battle of willpower. The fight between Voss and Kael'Vex was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The ground trembled beneath their feet as their weapons clashed, sparks flying from every blow. Kael'Vex's warframe was a towering terror, each punch and strike was capable of leveling entire city blocks. But Elias Voss was no ordinary opponent. He had fought for his life, for his people, and now, he fought for the future of the galaxy. With every blow, the weight of human history pushed him forward. The hegemony had underestimated their will to fight. They had never known what it was like to face an enemy who refused to yield. Voss ducked a devastating blow and retaliated, targeting the weak points in Kael'Vex's armor with a high-powered energy blade. The Va-Theri leader staggered, but his fury only grew. The Va-Theri had always believed themselves superior, and it was this arrogance that would be their downfall. The battle raged on, neither side willing to relent. The air was thick with the stench of burnt metal and the sounds of weapons clashing. Finally, with a surge of strength, Voss drove his blade through the chest of Kael'Vex's warframe, piercing the central core. The Va-Theri warlord let out an inhuman scream, but it was the scream of defeat. #### The end of the hegemony. With Kael'Vex's death, the Viatheri hegemony faltered. Their fleets, once mighty and invincible, were now leaderless and in disarray. The rebellion was not a spark that could be snuffed out, it was a fire that had consumed them. Humanity's victory was not just a triumph of military might, it was the resurgence of hope, the rise of a species that had fought to protect its future. The galaxy, once subjugated and terrified of the Viatheri, now turned its gaze to humanity. The hegemony's fall would echo across the stars for millennia to come. The galaxy had learned one undeniable truth: humanity was here to stay. The galaxy had changed forever. The fall of the Viatheri hegemony was not merely a victory, it was the birth of a new age. An age where humanity no longer bowed to the whims of galactic overlords, but instead stood shoulder to shoulder with one subjugated species, its hands extended in unity, not conquest. ###A galaxy reborn. With Kael'Vex's death, the Viatheri forces scattered like frightened prey. The once mighty empire, held together by fear and brutality, crumbled into 1,000 factions. Some tried to regroup, but the power that had held the galaxy in an iron grip was gone. The human rebellion had proven one thing above all: the hegemony's rule had been built on sand. In the wake of the fall, the Terran Armada became the cornerstone of a new galactic order. What had once been a ragtag fleet of desperate survivors was now the core of the interstellar union of free peoples, a coalition of worlds, both human and alien, united in the cause of freedom. The galaxy was rebuilding, from the ruins of war, into something better. Humanity's role had been cemented. They were not only survivors of the war, they were the architects of the future. ###The rise of a united front. As the remnants of the hegemony's forces scattered across the stars, a new council convened, not of tyrants and conquerors, but of leaders, both human and alien. Elias Voss, the face of humanity's resistance, was called upon to represent the galaxy's rebirth. Yet, even as he stood before the new council, Elias knew the true victory was not in their politics or titles, it was in the people who had fought, bled, and died for this new age. The galaxy's future wasn't in the hands of the elite, it was in the hands of the resilient, the uncompromising, the humble. To all who fought for freedom, Elias began, his voice echoing through the hall. This war wasn't just ours to win, it was the galaxy's to save. Let it be known, now and forever, that no matter the size, the strength, or the origin, no one will ever again stand in the shadow of tyranny. Cheers erupted from every corner of the council chamber. The galaxy was ready to heal. ###Humanity's legacy. In the years that followed, the interstellar union flourished. New alliances were formed, broken civilizations rebuilt, and once fallen species began to rise from the ashes. The Viatheri homeworld, Thalrock, was no longer a symbol of domination but a world of history, open to all races, its once ominous citadels now serving as monuments to the price of oppression. Humanity, though, never forgot the cost of their victory. The lessons of war were etched into their bones, and the very foundation of their future was built upon the idea that they would never again be complacent. The Sol system and its colonies became the heart of this new alliance, its people both the watchful guardians and the steady guiding hand. Humanity's legacy wasn't just in the victory itself, but in the ethos they inspired, one of resilience, unity, and compassion. It was a galaxy now bound not by the chains of fear, but by the strength of mutual respect. ###A new threat emerges. Though the galaxy had entered an era of unprecedented peace, the scars of the Viatheri conflict were still fresh, and with it, the dangerous truth that the remnants of the old empire would not vanish quietly. A small faction of the Viatheri, led by a shadowy figure known only as Zorkael, continued to operate in the depths of space, seeking to regroup and reclaim their lost glory. They had learned from their predecessors' failures, and their tactics were even more insidious, focused not on domination, but on subterfuge and manipulation. Zorkael's rise would be a challenge for the newly formed alliance, but humanity had learned a valuable lesson: they would never again be caught off guard. For now, though, the galaxy was at peace. A fragile peace, but peace nonetheless. And it was up to every human, alien, and freedom fighter across the stars to ensure it endured. The final message. As the galaxy celebrated its rebirth, Elias Voss stood alone in the quiet of the newly constructed Interstellar Union Citadel on Earth. He looked out across the stars, thinking of the men and women who had sacrificed everything to get to this moment. To those we lost, he whispered, his voice quiet but resolute. This victory was for you. Humanity's ultimate victory was for the galaxy. And with that, the eternal flame of humanity's will burn brighter than ever before. Their legacy was one of strength and compassion, one that would be passed down through the ages as the galaxy moved into a new era, one where humanity would forever be remembered as the spark that ignited the flames of freedom and hope.